Okay.
Hi, Sharon. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. We just unveiled some pretty interesting news about the two of us that neither one of us have ever had trouble talking. And we've also gotten into trouble for talking too much. So I think this is going to be a great interview.
Did your report card always say talks too much on it?
Oh,
Mine
I was voted most talkative in high school.
did.
I mean, I wanted to be best smile, but instead I actually won most talkative. And I was,
Okay.
I want best smile. Why am I voted most talkative? Okay, own it. So funny, so funny. Well, I want to introduce my podcast audience to you because you're a gem, and I feel so lucky to have been introduced to you by Laura Coe, Dr. Laura Coe, who I have also interviewed, but I also study with. And when we talk about studying, we're talking about the Akashic Records, which hopefully by the time we release your podcast episode, I'll release my blog post. I'll have released Laura's episode, and people will be so educated in my community. But Sharon Roemmel is not just an Akashic record reader. She is a wellness and healing expert of over 30 years. And I feel blessed to have been introduced to her, but I also feel blessed to have experienced her work on a deep level. And I do feel like we really, truly connect, which is one of my greatest values, of course. And Sharon, as we identified when I said, well, how do you want me to introduce you? Do you want me to actually say coach, healer, Akashic record reader? And really, I would call her part of the OG, right? 30 years ago, before wellness bust, right? Wellness is now so huge. So I think that's really, really neat that we have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and interesting. Not only are we both talkers, but connection is one of my top values as well.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. Well, that's not by chance. We know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think that it's interesting because yesterday I was interviewing somebody and she looked at me and she's like, you're an empath. And I said, I am an empath, but how did you know that? I mean, she's very spiritual, but like, she was like, you're like me. We're the same. This is where we connect. And I was like, true. So like attracts like, as we know.
Yeah.
And thank God for that, or else we wouldn't have met one another, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I see your little kitty in the background.
Yes, one of my cats is circling around. So thank you for having me on the show. I really enjoyed our connection before, so I'm excited to see where we take this conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting. So my first kind of question for you is kind of to just let our audience know a little bit more about you, but from your mouth, not from my mouth, because you know yourself better than anyone else, right? Mm-hmm. So why don't we do a little bit of that?
Okay. Well, my background of my college training and work for years was in social work. I knew I wanted to do something where I helped people, and I loved the work that I did, but then there became a point where I knew I wanted to do something more literally hands-on. Mm-hmm. We were talking about getting in trouble for or getting labeled as talkative. I also got in trouble for touching all the time. So I think when you're talking about opportunities, like taking those things that we're known for, and sometimes in a negative way. My parents would always say, put your hands in your pockets and don't take them out. Because I wanted to explore the world. Anyway,
that's probably also because you're a kinesthetic learner.
Yes, very much so, very much so. And that's not
what makes you good at your job.
Yes. So I switched then over into wellness. That was back in, I started in massage school 89, became a massage therapist in 91. And my goal was really to be a holistic health practitioner. But that wasn't something back in the 80s, that even existed, and, that I could go for a training. So I kind of just put it together myself, not totally strategically, but just as opportunities came up.
Yeah.
So I started with massage, and then my yoga teacher asked if I wanted to teach yoga, and I said no. And a year later, he asked me again, and it was the perfect timing then. And so I started teaching yoga back in the 90s, and then somebody asked me if I wanted to teach at a massage school, and so I did that for 17 years. But
wow.
So and that was a great opportunity as well. That then. As I was working with students, I said, I can tell this person's going to be a great massage therapist. And then they would come back a few years later and I'd run into them and they hadn't made it. And so I said, somebody needs to help these people because in massage school, they have this really supportive umbrella. I mean, you get to know people really well when you take off your clothes every week, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Massages.
All parts of you.
Yes, yeah. And so, you know, in school, they had this great support network, and then they got out of school and they're working in a little room by themselves, really different. So that's what then was the
That must be really hard, actually, like a hard transition.
It is for a lot of people, because I think while in massage schools, most of them, you know, offer some kind of business training. And that was one of the classes I ended up teaching. It's like a teeny little bit of the training. And if you've got people who are 18, you know, they've never even had a job, or they've had very few jobs, and now they're going to go out and be their own
boss, their own business owner.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the thing is, a lot of times people don't realize that a lot of these hands-on modalities, they're running their own business, right? It's not just that you're a spiritual healer or a massage therapist, which is a form of healing, right? But you're also trying to run a profitable business.
Right. And I see the same thing with people who go into Reiki. I mean, it's such an accessible training and such a powerful modality, but it, again, doesn't necessarily line you up to then be your own, you know, an entrepreneur out there with your own business, or yoga teacher. So I started.
I actually think that happens with coaching too, because most coaches don't know how to sustain a business. And it becomes very difficult to bring in revenue, right?
Absolutely. So that's why I started out then becoming a coach, is that, okay, I kept saying somebody needs to support these people, and everybody's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I would tell people, and then eventually I went, oh, it's mine, you know, I'm the one to do that. So then I started doing that. So
that's that deep listening, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's part of my massage journey. I was also taking classes on energy work and intuition, and then started offering readings, and then you know, talking about opportunities. Then, so, you know, I had a lot of balls in the air, and then the pandemic came along, and it's all of a sudden, then I'm not in an office anymore. I'm at home, and I could do a lot of the things that I did before. I switched my yoga classes to online immediately, and I could do the coaching and readings because I already was doing a lot of them online. But massage can't really do it online. Exactly. So it was really, I mean, I thought I would go back, but then when it came time where we could go back, I knew that it was time for me to be done. And it had been 29 years. So that was, you know, it's like, okay, I've done this a long time, and it's
hard on your body, by the way, too.
Well, for me, you know, it's a reason a lot of people leave is because of the physicality of it. But for me, because I started doing yoga really regularly early in my career and did a lot of self-care, I really didn't find it hard on my body.
Which is great.
Yeah, it was great. I just didn't, you know, COVID meant you had to, there was just all this extra cleaning and, you know, strip down the room, and it just made it seemed really sterile, like I was going to be more of a janitor or a nurse. And I don't know, I couldn't.
It almost lost the human connection. Going back to your, I mean, it did lose the human connection because obviously you weren't able to do that. But then, like you said, with COVID, it stripped it of the energetic exchange.
Yeah. And so it felt like it was not an easy choice to make, but it felt like it was the right choice. And then that gave me the opportunity then to I had more space in my schedule, so I could spend more time with these other things and explore other opportunities. It's like,
so where did the Akashic Records come in? Like, when did you officially started coaching, like what, 15 years ago?
Probably about, at least more than 15, probably 16, 17 years ago, something like that. And then the Akashic Records, I was already doing some readings, but then I'd stop because it just felt, the one system I learned had a lot of layers, and it felt really complicated. And And so I did it with a few clients still, but I didn't do it regularly. But then I had an Akashic record reading from somebody, and then when he started offering the training, I'm like, well, I'm just going to do it for me because I want to learn how to go and do this more for myself, never intending to do it for anybody else. But
did you feel like you got called to it? Because that's sort of the way I felt. Like it was a strange hit that I got that was like, oh, maybe you're supposed to read them.
I didn't get that, but for me, I definitely felt called to do healing work. I mean, I'd had one massage when I decided to go to massage school, which is sort of bizarre.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, but I had a sense it was something I wanted to do and that I would be good at it. And it felt like a calling. That is the best way to describe it. And so the Akashic Records and energy work also just did feel like a natural extension of what I did. It felt, it came easily to me. It's like I already felt energy, like you were saying, you were empath. I think I already felt those things. I already saw images. And even before I did massage, and then with massage, sometimes I'd put my hands on people and see things.
Their energy, yeah.
Yes, I mean, images, but I didn't know what they meant. So that's part of why I wanted more training. But
it's interesting about the Akashic Records. Can you actually give us your definition of what they are?
Yeah. So
for our audience, it is a concept that's a little bit out there, right? Not everybody, but really it is truly energetic work, right?
Right.
And I was thinking about it myself, like I've received a lot of readings from other people, like in my class and stuff. But when you said that you already kind of were able to see images and feel things, I do think that makes you a little bit more open to it, like almost like you can believe it because of the fact that you're already envisioning things.
Right. I'd taken this other training. I will get back to the definition, but I'd taken this other called full sensory perception. And the theory in that class was that we all have access to all these gifts, but for most of us, one opens up first and then maybe a second or whatever. And so sometimes I would see things, sometimes I would hear things, sometimes I would feel things, sometimes I smell things. And so I already, and it came into it with that. But my understanding of the Akashic Records, the word Akasha is a Sanskrit word that means ether. And it's this place out there in the ethers. We can't go there physically, but it's a place where there is a record of everything that you've thought, said, or done, which always gives me pause because, when I have a thought that isn't a nice thought, then I think, oh crap, that's just got recorded. So
exactly. That's why you have to constantly reframe.
Yes, exactly. So it's, it's past life, it's possible futures. If I keep making the decisions and taking the actions that I am, living the life that I am, this is where I will end up. But we always have free will. So, but there is a record, there are guides there. Guides
that guide, like how do we define a guide for people?
Well,
we all have them.
I don't know how other people describe it, but for me, when I go into the records, different entities show up for the person who I'm doing the reading with. And that might
Is it an angel?
Pardon?
Is it an angel?
I don't see them as angels. I see them, I mean, they're sometimes I see a guide and I see it's almost more like a person. It's in that sort of shape. But sometimes I just see more form and color and energy. And I will often sometimes I see one guide, sometimes it's a host of guides. It depends upon the person. But what I do see as a common theme is that the guides, there's some resonance between the guide's energy and your energy. Like you're assigned a guide, that there's some connection. And sometimes the guides will even say why they're assigned to you. That there's I've heard, and again, I don't know what other people say. I'd be curious about this. I've heard that some guides are in the records and that's where they always are. I've heard that some guides have had a life where they've been in physical form and now they're in the records. I've had other guides show up in the records. So I've had ancestors that have passed on. I've had extraterrestrial energy. I've had angels. So it can be all kinds of energies that show up, and they will usually say that, you know, if they're not of the records. But then in the records, then they will provide the information that's whatever your soul needs to hear.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've experienced that with you and also with Laura and other people that have seen different guides. And when I feel like a guide is there to deliver the wisdom or to hold space for us, which is why I see a guide different than an angel too, but I've also wondered their true differences. But they do show up as a guide, like almost like somebody who's there to shepherd you, like maybe a disciple.
Yes, yeah. And I guess I haven't, like a lot of times people want to know names. I feel like I block getting names because I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong. That's just a me thing. But I'm more interested in the content that comes through. And it is helpful sometimes to know, oh, this is your grandmother just showed up, you know, because that has a different
resonance
energy. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's going to have a different meaning to you, you know, that your grandmother is there and that she's saying something in particular versus you know, a guide from the records. But really,
a question for you. So like I have received this question before, and maybe you can help me put some verbiage around it. But what is the difference between, I mean, and I've experienced both, but the difference between an Akashic record reading and like an astrological reading or a psychic reading? Because the thing is, we can channel past, present, future as well. Ours is a visual representation generally, right? Or colors. But theirs is usually, like, for example, astrologically is usually done by cards, correct?
Well, astrologically, they're going to look at your
birth chart.
Yeah, and where, you know, when and where you were born and what the planets were doing and what they're doing now related to your chart. Psychic reading, I think, is such a general term, you know, that people, it depends upon their training, and some people may just come to it naturally and not come from a particular lineage, but different people are reading different kinds of things. So I think it's one thing that's useful to know is to ask people, where do you get your information? Sometimes it's like if somebody channels, they may be hearing one particular voice and often there's a name with that, and they may have information about that entity. Like Abraham Hicks, people know about that. It's like Esther Hicks is channeling a group of entities that she calls Abraham. Sometimes it's one specific. Some psychics are reading energy.
But was Abraham Hicks considered a psychic? Because he's an author, right? Isn't he a scientist?
Well, Esther Hicks is the person that channels.
Oh, is it? Okay.
And she then calls the group of entities that she channels, that she gets information from, Abraham, but it is a collective or a group. So I think it's a good thing to, if you're getting a reading, is to ask, where do you get your information, or, you know, how do you do this? Because, you know, sometimes it's information that feels clear. You know, one time I heard, I think it was Carolyn May say that even the best psychic is only, you know, 80 or 90% or something accurate, you know, so I
love Carolyn Mays.
Yeah. Well, so I always think, you know, find out where the person is getting their information. And that's why I think the Akashic Records are such a solid way, because it is this repository of information. But also, I really encourage people to check in with themselves. And if, like we were talking beforehand about the reading I had where I felt like, oh my gosh, why did I get this information? Because I already knew the answer and it was the exact opposite. And I think that was why I felt like the universe was saying, you know, you already knew you needed to leave your marriage, and then you went out to get confirmation. And so, I felt like they were messing with me. But I've gone to other psychics
But
where,
I think what you're tapping into is like the listening, the inner listening and the inner intuition and the inner knowing of oneself, right?
yes. And so when you're
So
getting,
often we second guess.
well, and so when you're getting a reading, to not turn that off. When I'm doing readings, I tell people, you may get information, and I'll check in with people and say, does that resonate? Does that fit with what you know? Because sometimes you're like, somebody says something and you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly it. That confirms exactly what I've been thinking, or feeling, or what I got. And sometimes you're like, that doesn't fit at all. And so to check in and say, is it because I'm resisting this, or is it because it really maybe isn't the right information for me?
Interesting. Because I have to say, having had both you and Laura read me, your styles are different too. So that actually is something too, is how do you receive the information from someone, right? And each person gives you a gift. It's like an energetic exchange, just like in any other relationship, right? Is that one person may pick up one thing and then the other person picks up another. And it's almost like you're putting the puzzle pieces together.
Yes, yeah, you called it nuggets, and I love that, because I think that's it. It's like there are these nuggets, and something kind of lights up for you. Because so I often ask people at the end, what's your biggest takeaway? And sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes I know exactly what they're going to say, but sometimes it's like, wow, that's interesting for them. That was the biggest piece, and I love knowing that.
Yeah, I have to say, I loved that you asked that question, because it's a great way to gain closure and to encapsulate the experience, to summarize it, right? Because it allowed me to be reflective, like right away. Like I was like, oh, what did I get from that? What was the biggest takeaway, right? And I think, like you said about the checking in with yourself, our particular reading definitely unveiled a bunch of stuff. But what it ensured me was that I was on the right path.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, that as people, a lot of times, that's why it's so great to check in with your soul purpose, right? Is because so often we're questioning, am I on the right path even? I think I am, but I'm not sure. Yeah. So I think one of the things that we talked about when we were on our call with each other, I guess a few weeks back, we talked a lot about yin and yang energy. And I'd love to hear from you the way you define it, because it's a pretty big concept, and it's not just feminine and masculine, right? Because that's such a simplified way of looking at it. And one of the things that I had shared with you is that it's been on my heart to balance out my yin with yang. And it's very easy for me, having come from the corporate world, and then because determination and resilience come so easy for me, to push instead of receive and flow. And the flowing and the receiving is more of a yin based approach. And so I'd love to hear from you what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think both are so important. And it was such an interesting conversation, especially I think as somebody who'd come from the corporate world, where for you, where that's what's rewarded, right? And that is our dominant culture. And I think it's so important to have that balance between the two. So the yin is really about being soft and receptive. And I don't know if people are aware of yin yoga, but in yin yoga, you hold a pose. Now, you wouldn't be standing in warrior pose, but you might do a seated forward bend. But you hold it for a period of time, and it can be intense to hold that. And I think it's the same thing with whether you're talking about opportunities or how you move about in your business or just your life in general. I think that holding, that being open and being receptive can be really challenging. It sounds like the soft, easy work, right? But it's not. Yeah. And so for me personally, I've had to really learn to be okay with that. And because I often have hated the waiting periods. Like I love it when I know what I'm going to do and I get to step into action and like, okay, let's go.
Exactly.
To-do list.
That's where you and I are very similar.
Yeah. But that place of like, I know that I'm supposed to make a change, but I don't know. When I went from social work to doing healing work, I knew at some point that I needed to make a change, but I couldn't figure it out. I just couldn't, and it was very frustrating to me because I couldn't find the right little
Mix
box to plug into, right? So my
Yes.
social worker I can plug into, but I couldn't find the right box. And so there really was this period of letting the ideas gestate and talking to people and taking opportunities.
When you say IDAs, what do you mean?
Say that again.
When you say letting the IDAs,
Oh, I
would have. Do you mean like what? Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure what I said, but
You said there was a period of time because you didn't know. There was a period of time where like you had to let the IDAs, kind of settle and simmer. But I'm thinking you're meaning like I would have, or I could have, I should have.
So there really was a period of maybe a year and a half where I had to be in that receptive state, and it took going inward and then paying attention to the opportunities when the right opportunity came. And then there were a series of things where I went to I can't remember the name of it now, humanistic psychology conference. I would go to that every year, and I picked up this paper for a training and went, okay, I think I might do that. And then at that, I picked up another thing that was, I was living in Indiana, and there was this thing in Oregon, and I'd always wanted to go to Oregon, and it felt like this opportunity. I kept putting the paper down and saying, I can't afford to do that. And then picking it up a week later and saying, I finally just said, I can't afford not to do this. I just felt a real call, but it was in that place of receptivity and think letting my desires bubble up. Well, what is it that I want? If I want something different, if I'm feeling called to something different,
letting your desire guide you versus pushing for what people think that you might want, or the obligation, right?
Yeah, because I did do the opposite. I was working for this program for 7 years. It was a grant funded program, and it was truly my dream job getting out of college, where I worked with girls. They were considered at risk of poverty, drug abuse, or whatever, those kind of things. And I got to take them camping and do crafts and hang out with them in this really kind of intimate way, for where it wasn't like a typical social work thing where you spend an hour with somebody. Exactly. It was like, and then you leave over the years. And I love that job, but I got tired of always having to find my salary because it was grant funded. And so I finally said, okay, I'm just going to go for a regular job. And I applied for a job with the state as a voc rehab counselor. It was a fine agency, fine work, but I took that job out of fear, out of how can I take action? I'm going to take the test. It wasn't like, oh, I felt really called to be a voc rehab counselor. It was more from that place of action. So I did that. And then that's where I went, okay, I need to do something different.
I think what you're outlining, which I speak to a lot in my coaching practice, is people think that it's linear, that
right.
They've almost forgotten the early stages of their life where you landed into an opportunity and you basically sat in that role for, nowadays people don't even stay in a job for a year, but like 2 years, 5 years, whatever it might be. And then that led to something else, or you built yourself within that company and it gave you more exposure. But each point along the way was a clue for the next step, right? Yes. And I think the thing is that that listening period that keeps coming up, and I know this because I'm actually in that same stage that you're discussing, is that there's so many things we can do, but it doesn't mean you're meant to do it. Like you're good at a lot of things,
yes,
but it doesn't mean that's your calling, right?
Right. Yes.
So I love the way you're describing that, because it does take time to decide that this is the right fit, and maybe even for now.
Yes, yes. And for me, it's about waiting, and then as information, so people come through who provide information. Sometimes that may be the only reason they've crossed my path, I think. And sometimes opportunities come through, and I can weigh them. And I think sometimes when I'm coaching, people are like, I get the sense sometimes people want the thing, right? It's all wrapped up in a box, and
like, give me the answer and I'll go that direction. You're like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And so you do something, and then people sometimes feel bad if it doesn't work. It's not perfect, but I always like describe it as it's like fodder, right, for helping you make the decision. So what did you enjoy? What called you to that? And then, like, so for one thing I did during the pandemic, one of my friends said, here's what I'm doing to fill my time. And she was working on a psychic hotline.
That's so cool.
Apply. So I applied, and a few months later I heard from them, and I ended up getting in, and I worked for them for 9 months, and I really enjoyed it. And it really helped build my confidence as a reader, because you never know who's going to call, right? You're just,
for sure,
you're hooked into the line you pick up, and you don't know who from what country and what question. And so I did it, but what I found was, in contrast, when I was doing the Akashic record readings, which really were about going deep for an hour with somebody and about soul's purpose, like that fed me. The other I enjoyed, but it wasn't quite right. So it was like, okay, this, but not this part. And I think that's part of the gift of trying out these things, right? Is you get clarity. And that's what at least what I'm seeking, is clarity to help me then know what that next step is.
Yeah, I feel that same way. I feel that in the yin, more of your true self almost comes forward.
I love that. Yes.
That it's without distraction, and that it's more, for me at least, I feel like it's more true to my my real purpose. Because I think that many people will meet me and they see that I'm strong and I'm vocal and I'm clear or whatever, but I also have this extreme softness about me.
Yeah.
That if I trust the process, right? I'm a Libra, right? So it's all about trying to get in balance. But that if I trust the process and I'm not forcing it and I'm more listening, that the true answer comes.
Yeah, and that's part of what I felt with you in the reading. It's like, I think that's why it came up, because I really felt both. I felt the strength, the more masculine kind of energy, like this person can take charge, but I also felt that internal feminine power running really deep within you. So I really, I feel that about you.
Yeah, it's so interesting how in these readings you can see so many sides of people, right? And you could see it, but you could feel it. Like, people question often, like, well, can I feel it through the waves of the Zoom or through whatever it is, the call? But I think that, like you're saying, that having done the psychic hotline during COVID, that it almost honed your skills.
Yes.
Yeah. So what would you say is like your favorite thing to do of all the modalities, like that you feel that you get the most like results from people?
Man, that's tough. I don't know about modality, but I lead a retreat to Mexico. And
cool.
So
I didn't know about that.
Yeah. So I on that retreat, it's a yoga retreat. I mean, I call it a yoga retreat, but I often offer EFT sessions or coaching sessions or readings as part of that. Sometimes individual, sometimes group, depends upon the year. And
when do you do that generally?
I do it in January or February. This year we're going in January. So
cool.
So I love that, because it lets me show up on so many levels, and intuition really comes in, because I have to read the group. So,
Of course.
it's like, well, so it's kind of backwards of, I wish I could do it the other way. Like a lot of people do retreats and they say, this is a retreat for feminine empowerment. This is a retreat for rejuvenation. But what I do is, this is a retreat, and then I wait and see who shows up when we do a few pre-retreat meetings. And so I'm already starting to get a sense of what the participants verbally say they're there for. Like, this year and last year, it's like rejuvenation, right? I mean, people are kind of fried. And so that, but then also when the group is there, it's like reading the group and saying, okay, like one year it was all about grief. So many people showed up who were in deep grief. They'd lost someone near to them. It's just so interesting that a theme shows up. And so then I can use my counseling, my coaching, my
it's like integrating all your efforts and not just showcasing one side of yourself. And I think that's actually what's difficult a lot of times for all of us practitioners, because I think a lot of people are like, what aren't you certified in, Michelle? And I think, I think we're very similar. Not all people are, but like a lot of practitioners want to continue to improve themselves so that they can bring those skills to their clients, right?
Right.
And it just makes us able to hone in even that much greater on how to help them, right? How to provide service. And so my question for you is, in this retreat, like, is it like, do you just sign up online, or how does that work?
I have a web page on, that has all information. Pardon?
On your website?
On my website, yes. And yeah, people do sign up. I usually have, like this year, it's about half returning and half new, which is always fun because, it's nice to know people want to come back. And then it's also fun to have new energy and people, tell other people, that kind of thing. So yeah, and I have done other, local, like, so I'm in Oregon. I've done some weekend, in the woods, at a retreat center kind of thing. And also some virtual retreats. But with the pandemic, I haven't done as much, I haven't done those. And
but you realize also that when you do those, I used to do a ton of events as well prior to the pandemic. There's a lot of energy investment.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize, you start to weigh out, like, is it necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that where I want to invest my energy? Right.
Yeah. And I had to pull back on a bunch of things because I knew my dad died in
I'm sorry.
2017. I mean, he was in his 90s and I knew he was getting close to the end. And then my brother died in 20 from a brain tumor. My mom died last Christmas. It was a lot. And I felt like, I didn't want to be canceling things. I knew I had these aging parents. My mom was 90, almost 93. And, so I knew that all of that was coming to, to a head. And I just felt like I need to be available, if something happens.
That's like you were listening.
Yes, I was. Yes.
To what you needed. And is an important part of the process. It's interesting because I do feel like, whether it be guides or angels or the universe or God, like somehow cyclically, they know when we need space in our calendars. Yes. And so, again, it's a testament to listening and whether or not we want to actually use our yin energy or our yang energy.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And receive, right? Because we want to be in the place of receiving. And especially when you experience so much grief, it's about really seeping into that. And that's a lot of stuff to process, right?
It was, yeah. And now we're doing a major remodel. And so it's, I'm living in this RV, it's been 6 months. So
good for you.
Maybe another month and I'll be back in my house. So I just know that it doesn't make sense for me to try to like spread my energy out, right? It's still in that place of okay, I need to be here where I am, but I have a sense that, on the other side of this, I can kind of feel almost like the waves, you're waiting for the tide to come in.
Completely.
I can feel, it's like things rejuvenating and shifting. And it's like, okay, maybe it's next fall, that I do
Well,
another.
it's funny that you say that, because you had said yourself before we got on the call that you were talking, because I was sharing with you how crazy my last 2 days have been. And I'm like, is something going on that I need to know about? I mean, I know it was the full moon, but gosh, I made it through retrograde with no problem. And you had said, the shifts are going to happen through December. And, and I think that's part of this waiting period that some of us are experiencing and sitting into the discomfort, because we're trying to assess if this opportunity, whatever that is that we're evaluating, is the right one.
Yeah. And for me, it's like I said before, I have often found that waiting period challenging. And so finding ways to be with it has really helped me. So being out in nature for me is one way.
Me too.
Because I find on the other side, I go, oh, that's why I had to wait till now.
Exactly.
Opportunity wasn't available yet, or it wasn't the right timing for me, but now I get it. Oh, I wish I could go back and say, oh, I could have like relaxed more, right, during that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel that same way. Well, I could clearly talk to you forever.
Yes.
We are like-minded souls, to say the least.
Oh.
I always like to ask people the question of what their top 5 core values are, because I always love to know where their alignment lies. So what are yours?
Well, connection is one of them for sure. And it's connection with myself, because I grew up disconnected from myself. So connection with source, connection with myself, and connection with nature, with other people. It's all of that. Wellness is another one, because I feel, and by wellness, I mean physical, mental, emotional, energetic wellness, because I feel like if I don't tend to that, then I don't have the energy for the things that I want to do. And creativity is another one. And it's creativity in terms of crafty kinds of stuff, but also creativity in my business, and creativity in my relationships, and and in what I teach and how I work. Playful, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons that for me, readings and teaching yoga, I'm somebody who grew up with a mom who was really organized, a really planner, and I really learned that well, which is why I'm good at leading the retreat, because I start planning, way ahead. But it helps me to soften, and again, that's that yin part, right? Is to soften and go, I don't know. I've done things before where I've planned it all out. I've planned out a class or something, and then it's so wooden that it's like, oh, that didn't meet the people who were here. So for me, that
it's playful to show up and not know, and just create as you go.
Yeah. So when I teach yoga now, I do an opening meditation, and then I ask people where they want to focus. And so yesterday, somebody said feet and grounding. Somebody said low back. Somebody, you might say centered, it's all kinds of things. And then I create the class as we go around that.
I love that, because
so good.
I agree. Like, too many people it's so rigid. And like you said about coaching clients coming and wanting to know exactly what they're supposed to do. Part of the beauty of coaching is unveiling that process as you go and coming to that end result, right?
Yes. And I'm with them. I want it all, I wanted somebody to give me.
We all want to.
Right. But it's not how it works. And so I love that creative process, which with coaching, it's a co-creation, right? So all of that, everything I do has some element of creativity in it.
Well, I just want to acknowledge you. Did you say 3? Did you say 5?
That was only 3.
That was only 3. So keep going. I want to know the other 2.
No, that's, I just, like, for me.
Okay, you could do the other 2. I can pick them for you if you want.
I don't know if I know the other 2 at this point. I just, like, I can hold on to 3, it's like that's what
a good number, by the way. 3 is a good number. So I just want to thank you for your time, and I really want to acknowledge you for your gifts. You're an extremely gifted practitioner, and I have been honored to work with you. And I love the way you describe our conversation around yin versus yang energy, and sort of bringing and encapsulating that back in is just so important for us to all listen on a deeper level.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michelle. It was fun. I enjoyed.
I think fun is one of your values.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so. It's one I wasn't necessarily trained,
Weren't allowed to feel it earlier.
Yeah. So yes, I think it is up there too. So thank you. This was very pleasurable. So thank you.
Oh, good. Well, I know we'll be in touch soon. And please tell people where they can find you, whether that be on your website, if you have an Instagram or another social media platform you'd like to share before we close.
Okay. So my unfortunate business name is Practically Enlighten You. I wouldn't say that's one of my high skill levels. It's way too long. So they can, and my last name is Roemmel, which isn't necessarily easy to spell. So if they just look for SharonR.com, that will get them to my website, and then they can find the different services in there. That's probably the easiest way. And I am on Instagram, and I think at this point I changed my website a year ago, so I should have the social media stuff on there. I should know that, but
that's okay. Yeah, it's because it's not a priority for you. A lot of healers don't want to be on it.
Well, yeah, I'm not on it a lot. I do sometimes put things. I used to be on it a lot, but then it wasn't fun at one point. So I'm
very taxing.
Yes. I don't do as much of it. So, but I love it when people reach out, and I'm happy to talk to people more about the things that I do. So.
Well, I think you're amazing, and I will definitely make sure that people look you up. I do want to note one thing before we get off the call that I find super fascinating and interesting. So it has to be with the way the light is shifting, but it's not by chance.
The rainbows?
Yeah. It was on the left side, my left side, and it's now shifted to the right side.
Well, I live in the woods. My house is up in the woods, and I don't get a whole lot of light up there. So it was one advantage when I was in the RV is I have all these prisms that I used to have at my office. So I have them in every window, and I'm in the pasture now, me and the goats in the pasture. And so the light comes in. And so sometimes like a rainbow will come
down your third eye. Oh, that's amazing.
So, yeah, they're always moving. So that is one thing I will miss about living down here.
Well, I think it's a sign.
Yes.
I'm listening.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, have a wonderful day. I really appreciate you joining me today on Opportunity Knocks, and we'll look forward to more fun.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I look forward to more fun with you too. Bye.
Bye.